community together. There are a couple of ways of viewing the screen. There's a 9-square grid, top right, it says view. If you put it on speaker view, whoever is speaking will be largest on your screen. If you have it on gallery view, you can look around the room and see who else is here in community with you. So Zoom tips. I think for generally, those are the most important parts of Zoom. So in that chat feature, where we invite you to tell us where you're joining from, also throughout this session, please feel free to put your questions there. So we will do our best to keep track of the questions. We have 90 minutes together. Each session will be slightly different in format. But we will have we'll have a presentation and conversation led by, well, Bob Garthson is our guest today, and he'll be talking with you about cover crop options, and he's got a wealth of knowledge. Bob will talk with you. Natalie will guide the conversation. Natalie Forstbauer is your host of the Soil Summit. She will guide the conversation, and we will also keep track of your questions and do our best to allow enough time to get through all of them. So for those who are in the room, that gives you the advantage because we'll see your questions first, and anything that, you know, we'll get to as many as we can. So welcome to the Soil Summit, first day of 4. We're very excited to offer this summit for you. So the summit is an online conference. It's a way of us being together, to be in community. And we share some of the same goals. You know, we want to regenerate our soils. We want to grow healthy plants. I would guess that many of us have a reverence for nature. Notice the brilliance of nature and wondering, what can we learn from that? What can we hear that others have learned from mimicking nature? I would suggest that we are all likely here because we believe community is important, and being with others. You know, and I understand farming can be very solo at points. And so coming into community and seeing these connections with others is very valuable. It's a gift to be in the room with each of you today. So I am a backyard gardener. I love my garden. I love growing food. I don't think there's anything better to eat than something that I walk outside barefoot, pick and eat. In the summer, I will actually just go sit outside. I'll sit in the middle of my garden and eat whatever's around me. So that's, I do spend a lot of time on the computer with Heart and Soil in preparing Heart and Soil magazine and events, and the nature is just my reset. So I love to be out, and I can feel the power and beauty of nature. So we welcome you back into this room for our 90 minutes together. And Natalie Forstbauer is a lifelong farmer. She has a lot of varied farming experience and wonderful stories. And she just has a heart for you. She really just wants what's best for you in your growing. So in your farming, in your gardening, in the profitability as a farmer. So how to get your, how to earn money from selling what you're growing. But also for your well-being. So your mental health, your physical health, spiritual health. And Natalie and I share that. we love this community. We want to support you. So we have a very heart-centered community, meaning that we are just delighted to be with you and to connect with you and to grow together. So with this time together, we invite you to really give yourself the gift of this time. Come with curiosity and wonder and an open mind. So what will you hear today that will nurture your growing journey? So I'm going to get us started, Natalie, with this conversation. So Natalie Forsbauer, your host and fabulous human being, you're on mute.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for welcoming us into the room and for your beautiful presence, just setting the stage for us to learn and grow together. I deeply appreciate you. And I deeply appreciate each of you in this room and the work that you do with your hands in your soil and your feet on the ground and just showing up to learn more about how to build healthy soil and being in a community. It's a powerful place to be with each of you. So thank you for your presence. And, as Leslie was introducing the summit, this session to us, it just popped into my head that I wanted to invite everybody just to take a moment and just pause wherever you're doing. If you're driving, maybe just become really present in this moment. Don't close your eyes. If you want to close your eyes, you're welcome to. If not, you can keep them lightly gazed open. And I just want to invite you to think about something that you're grateful for in this moment, in this very moment. Like if something just kind of popped into your heart or into your mind's eye, what would that be? I just want to invite you to feel that gratitude and where you might notice it in your body and or in your mind or in your soul and just notice how nourishing that gratitude is for the ethos of who you are and the collective of who we are. Gratitude is something that we really presence in Heart and Soil, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be sharing these very wise and powerful and insightful voices with our community. And at the same time, I also want to amplify your individual and collective wisdom because every single person in this room has wise roots and a wise reach. And part of this conversation is as much about you deepening into your own inner compass and your own inner wisdom as it is about learning in community with Bob today about cover cropping. So I just really want to connect you to that wisdom that you have as you're working with your soil, as you're working with yourself, as you're having conversations in your relationships and all the wisdom that is bestowed upon you, both in what you know and what you don't know, because what we don't know is also a form of wisdom. And with that, I am delighted and excited to be having a conversation with Bob Garthson today. He is an organic farmer, kind of more retired organic farmer. He's a mentor. He was an educator, a teacher for decades in the school system. He now he works with farmers and NGOs around the world to help them build healthy soil and grow healthy food. And he works with agroecology and cover crops. And his roots are really deep and wide. And so some of the other things I can get, maybe Bob, I'll let you tell us more a little bit about your background and but before you do that, I just want to amplify Bob's experience is deep and wide, and what we thought we'd do at this time together is just really open it up for a live Q&A with everyone in the room. And it's geared towards and around cover crops. So that's what we're really going to be diving into. And that can take us in a lot of directions. So I'll be bringing it back to that theme because I know people are invested in their time here because that's what we're here to talk about. And at the same time, as questions surface, just pop them into the chat and then we will answer them as we go, and we will, and if time allows, maybe we'll have some people come on as well for some one-on-one work and coaching with Bob. So welcome, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us. We love you and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ali. It's an honor to be here. The people you bring together for these summits are first class. I've learned a lot from them over the years. Some of them much longer than Heart and Soil's been alive. And we're part of a community. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background in a minute, but I want you to imagine yourself right now on the ground where you're going to plant, on the soil. If we can agree that our mission is to not just supply food, but to do no harm, we have to think about why, how we enrich, how we protect, and how we use and share that blessing. Over 50% of the world's topsoil is gone right now. Climate change is putting increased threats, and I read an article today that food insecurity is going to be one of the biggest issues very soon, if it's not already. And I'm not just talking about in poor countries, in many countries. So I'd like you to think about that just for about 30 seconds. Put yourself on the ground. I started all my workshops by calling them gardening or farming from the ground up. So get down there on the ground. No tractors, no equipment, just your body and your bare hands. Feel it. It's living. It's got more things in 1 square inch, more millions of living organisms than we can ever imagine. How do we keep them helping us and everything else that's alive? I had the pleasure of listening to Ben for some of the last one, and you know, I was fortunate that I could have gardens that mimicked nature. I didn't buy a big commercial farm with flat fields. I have trees and bushes and plants. I learned from my grandparents. My grandfather had been a farmer, gardener. He was a horse whisperer. So I was breaking horses and training horses before I could walk, taking the hay off the fields, and then going and planting the garden. When I was 10 years old, they said, hey, you might as well have your own spot. So that's when I started, 1956. There were no organic standards. There was no publication of biodynamic calendars. I first connected with Rodale and others along the way. I learned about some of that, but it's a learning process every day. I was a teacher because I learned from students every day. I'm a farmer and a gardener because I learn from living things every day. So I want to learn from you as well. And there's a secret about trees. Why do I call it family? Why are they our relatives? They have just found in the DNA that we and trees are related. How many of us think of that? They're our relatives. They know more than we do. They've been around a lot longer. And I've learned a lot from my connections with Indigenous people and practices over the years. And I have the good fortune to be the global education advisor with Dryland Solutions, Somalia, the most downtrodden, beaten up, climate-wise, politically wise, anywhere in the world, and they're now facing it again. The people there decided they wanted to feed themselves. They didn't want to be dependent on food handouts when they got them. So they now have thriving gardens in the most difficult place in the world. And we are trying to build that movement, because if we can feed people in Somalia, we can feed people anywhere. And we can do it well. So that's really the focus. So put yourself in that situation. Our good fortune, most of you, I think, are probably in places where you can safely grow food. Different kinds of food, and I want to learn about that, but that's really important. And I want to show you a couple of things. Can I hold that up? There's a whole apple. I got that? Yeah. See? Have I got that?
No, you bring it over to in front of you.
Okay, right
there
here.
You go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see that.
Then I want you to see this one. That was cut an hour ago.
Yeah, in front of you, Bob.
In front of me. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
What's the difference? What's the difference? What's happening there? It's starting to rot. It's breaking down. It's losing its vigor. That's what happens to soil when we keep it bare. In nature, soil is not bare. The richest soil in the world is in virgin forests and in grasslands. How do we learn from that and move forward in that process? That, to me, is the most important thing, because it's the learning that'll get us what we need. I'm going to talk about some specific things, but I also want to talk about the interrelationship between cover crops and mulches. We often describe them as two different things. In fact, there's a direct relationship, and sometimes things, one can be exchanged for the other. So we're going to talk about that. Where can you get detailed information? Well, you probably have lots of sources, but I'll just give you a few. I know High Mowing Seeds is involved here. I've been working with them for three decades or more. And they have in their book a number of cover crops that would be useful. I want to just highlight one there. It's called an understory mix. You use it where you plant. So much of what I'm talking about is not just a separate cover crop. Yes, we have to have cover crop and crop rotation, but it's bringing the two together. So there's High Mowing Seed, there's Johnny's, there's West Coast Seeds, there's William Dam Seeds, and you probably know many others. All of them tell you about the cover crops they have available. They give you all the information you really need, and you want to fit that to your particular environment and what works in rotation. So I have used a rotation for many, many years. Usually if I want to start with the fall, with winter rye. Why winter rye? Because it's allelopathic, it kills weeds, and because it has a huge root ball. You have to plant it early enough that it will mature, but the seed is readily available in most places. So that's a basic one. Now let's go into the spring. So I do only minimum till at most, and I'm going to tell you how I got away from that, but I would do minimum till to till in that rye and then leave it for a couple of weeks. And then lightly work it again. What do you replace that with? Well, if you're not planting vegetables this year or in part of your garden, the next thing you're going to put in is probably peas and oats or some combination of that. Again, readily available. Following that, 1 or 2 crops of buckwheat. Buckwheat brings in the pollinators big time. It's a great cover crop. And then, of course, back to that, they go back to either more oats or to winter rye. Now, there's lots of other things that you can use, and they're great. Teff, mustard, vetch, sorghum, Sudan grass, annual rye. They all have their values, and you have to look at what works best for you. But what you want to do is cover where you're not working, and then we'll talk about the mulching on the other side in terms of what that means. You could use a number of things like annual rye and clovers in your pathways. They're tough. They love being stepped on. Remember, though, that when you go on the soil, especially with big equipment, you are killing millions of living things. You're compacting the soil. When you go on foot, you're having a negative impact to some extent. What you want to do is have a buffer, something soft that your foot goes on instead of directly on the soil. So that's what that's about. You know, we can get at it in more different ways. And then before I get into talking about switchgrass, which is usually overlooked and it's my favorite plant, I want to point out that while you are growing, you're also can grow cover crops. Pedrivic sunflowers, daikon radish, whatever it is that you want to grow in that ground is going to help to enrich the soil. It's going to help to deepen the soil. I grow daikon radishes to eat, but I've had them in a number of years that were more than 2 feet long. Imagine that. One vegetable, broad and long, enough to feed many, many people, but it's helping my soil. And the tougher your soil, the harder your soil, the more you want to get that kind of product in the garden. sunflowers, other flowers, other flowering things, bring in pollinators. They do a number of things. So I think, honestly, and Natalie, I'd like to see if people have any questions or input from that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what we actually put down, not only as mulches, but also the importance of switchgrass.
Mhm. Yeah, so Bob, I think you gave us a really good overview. And how would, if you were to summarize what a cover crop is, what would you summarize, like what it is and what are the main purposes of the cover crop?
Well, it's three things. One, of course, it covers the soil if it's planted correctly. It brings nutrients to the soil, reduces chemical pesticide use and any pesticide or herbicide or fertilizer use. Because, and the better the cover crop, the more it does that. That's why I wanted to talk about switchgrass. But they all have that function. They protect the soil that you don't want to plant this year by getting it ready for when you do want to plant. If it's in a separate area, if it's in the area you're working, it adds richness to the soil and nutrients to the soil while you're planting. And then you have the benefit in many cases of either harvesting it for human food, or in the case of the sunflowers, you might use it for birds or other things. And also borage and ficella, which are pollinator plants, but also cover crops. So these are living things you can put right in your garden, either in a row or as part of, I intercrop. So in some of my raised beds, maybe I should explain, in my main garden, I had approximately 100 beds. I had other gardens. They were 50 feet long by 12 feet wide. I often had up to a dozen different things growing in that one bed. Plants that were compatible, because what you don't want is bare soil. So another cover crop that everybody can use is lettuce. Put lettuce in with almost everything, and it will help to cover the soil, and you can then eat it. So those are inexpensive things that you can do. Others may have other green plants that are more conducive to their environment or their temperature. But the thing about lettuce, there's special varieties that go right from the very early spring to ones you can plant and are hardy through the fall and can take frost. So don't just plant lettuce, plant the variety that's going to suit your purpose, and you will always have some of that present. It's a light feeder. It doesn't cause any damage. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I loved how you touched on your market, or not market garden, but the raised bed, because everybody can cover crop, right? It doesn't matter if you just have a small little garden in your front or backyard, or a container garden, or if you're farming thousands or tens of thousands of acres, you can cover crop and do the interspecies like you're talking about.
And I now have raised beds in Coburg, a town in Ontario. They're 6 feet long by 2 feet wide by 3 feet high. So there's deep soil, and I intercrop. I have other gardens, but those are ones that produce from spring through to winter. With no, and I use, when I need special color covers, I use them, but those beds are full. You can't see the soil.
What would you, yeah, I want to go into some of the different cover crops and what they're used for and how to use them. But what do you see as the biggest mistake in using cover crops?
Well, I think there's different types of planting. As you know, you can drill or you can plant by hand. If you're planting by hand, you've got to plant it thicker, because it's not going to get the same germination rate. If you drill, then you're using equipment and you're having an impact. So whether that's more negative, you have to weigh your soil and what you're going to do. So, so that is often the issue, is the rate and the timing. You don't plant buckwheat in Ontario in April or May, right? You wait till the soil is warm. So that's an issue as well. And then, of course, the other issue is, what happens if you don't knock down buckwheat? Well,
Yeah,
you've just produced seeds for the next 100 years, right? So,
yeah.
So timing is everything. And I've gone to lots of places. Oh, Bob, I want to show you my buckwheat, and it's all full of mature seeds, right? Yeah. I said, you can't stop that now. Those seeds are going to fall on the ground. regardless of what you do.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to do that and to look at combinations as well, because with a few exceptions in some circumstances, no one thing will do everything. So what is the best combination for you?
I love
And
that question.
what will allow, if you're putting it in pathways, for example, can you walk on it? You know, can you put equipment, if you're dragging a trailer or a wagon or whatever you're using, wheelbarrow, can you in fact navigate that area? And so that's really important, I think. And we often forget that there are living cover crops. Squash and pumpkin is a living cover crop. Why? Because it suppresses the weeds you don't want, covers the soil, and protects plants that prefer shade. So like, that's why for me, it's all a question of how we work together with all these things, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to do this today. A lot of people think it's a linear process that I've talked to in the past. It's much more than that. It's a feeling process. What feels good? What did I remember from last year that I'd change a little bit, or I'd use again? Or what did I learn from someone doing a workshop, or when I visit a farm? What did I learn from them? Which clover worked for them? Because there's all kinds of clovers people can choose. They'll see them in the catalogs. There's also like places like William Dam sell a spring, summer, and fall bio mix designed to work at that time together. So that may be for, especially for smaller gardeners, that may be the right way to go. So it's looking at what you're going to do. The biggest mistake of all, people tell me they bought a piece of property and they want me to give them advice on what they can plant tomorrow. Did you put in cover crops for a year or two? No. Well, what's going to happen? Well, there'll be weeds, but we can handle that. Everybody on this call, how many of you know people who couldn't handle the weeds? Why? Because they thought they could plant and take care of them. Why do most people quit their gardens? Because of weeds, right? So weeds have a real positive place to play at the right time, but how do you remove them? When do you remove them? And are you going to do things? I was at a farm a year ago, 2 years ago, young guy, started up a market garden, organic and all the rest of it. And they had rows of weeds growing up to 8 feet, 10 feet high, some of them. And I said, why did you do that? Well, we think everything should live together. I said, well, tell me next year how that worked. Right? So if we want to actually grow healthy food and keep growing it, then I think it's important to say, did this work? If oats doesn't work, don't keep using it forever. It may not work one year, it may work the next, but find something that works for your soil, your environment, your situation. And you're not growing these cover crops primarily to take off the crop. You're growing it for the value that it has. So someone says, well, I'm going to grow buckwheat and then I can harvest the buckwheat. Well, no, you're not. That you're growing that for a different purpose. But my next door neighbor was an apple grower. He brought me a big jar of buckwheat honey. He said, this is actually all yours because the bees all went to your buckwheat. That's why I have honey. So it's that understanding of the connection and the learn from what you do and change when you need to. And we can talk about specific cover crops for what people need. Okay.
That's beautiful. I love that. Feel into what you need to do next. Bob, you brought up buckwheat a few times, and I, having farmed in the prairies, it comes up to use buckwheat as a cover crop, and pardon me, it's also fiercely feared as a cover crop because exactly what you said. It's a short crop, so it blooms very quickly and it goes to seed very quickly. And if you do not put it down before before it goes into the seed, you're in trouble. But one of the things I heard about it, and I'm just wondering if you could verify this or not, is that buckwheat is great at making phosphorus more bioavailable in the soil. Have you seen that research, or is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
The other secret about buckwheat, and it's true with many things, we tend to think big is good.
Mm-hmm.
Where were the first mature seeds produced on buckwheat cover crop? On the smallest plants. Why? Because cattle ate wild animals ate all these things, they would eat them off. How could they? Remember, their goal is reproduction. Gardening is all about sex. It's all about reproduction. They're going to fool you into thinking, I'm just a tiny little plant. Don't bother with me. Just take those big guys. So they produce the seed first on what is less obvious. But yes, they do add nutrients. And you'll see when I talk about switchgrass, which is a very underutilized crop, all the things it does, right? But everything you put in there, it's not as allelopathic as rye, but rye is even worse if you let it grow to mature seed.
Yeah.
You're never going to get rid of the rye ever in your lifetime if you've got a whole garden full of mature rye seed. Winter rye.
Right. And I just want to give a shout out. We did an interview with Gabby last year, Gabby Gonzalez, and she talked about how she uses she used cover crops to restore some fields that she planted strawberries on, some biodynamic strawberries, and it's a really, really good session. So if you have that last year's soil summit and you haven't watched her session yet, definitely check it out. It's fabulous. So let's
can I just mention something else? The most common people on bigger farms, especially with animals, grow hay. Hay is a cover crop. Why is it hard to get organic hay, organic straw? Because there's more value leaving it there than it is to take it off and sell it. Right? So I'm just throwing that in, that we don't think of it as a cover crop, but it actually is, because it covers the soil. It allows the microorganism to flourish.
I love how you're probably reframing it. Tell me, maybe nod your head or put one in the chat if this is true. Reframing what cover crops are for yourself, because a lot of people think of cover crops as like rye, fall rye, for example, and let it grow and put it back in, or like clover, put it in and let it grow and turn it under. But I love how you amplified squash as a cover crop. And
and there's so many different types of clover, and they all have different purposes. Some of them are inexpensive, some are very expensive. But understanding what clover you're planting, you don't go to the store and say, could you just give me 10 pounds of clover? Because you may not be getting the one you want. You're likely not going to get the one you want. That's why if you go to any of the magazine seed catalogs I mentioned, they'll tell you about the different clovers.
Are there any combinations of cover crops that we want to avoid, or is there a cover crop that you think is not a good one to use?
Well, I think if you don't have the capacity to work in winter rye, I would caution very much about that, because it has a massive root ball. If you do it carefully with the right equipment, hopefully with a team of horses and equipment that you're using, yes. But I would not recommend putting it in community gardens or raised bed gardens or smaller gardens where you can't do that adequately. So that would be one extreme. The other is always know your zone. Some things are going to do better in some zones than others. I'm speaking from the point of view of very southern Ontario. I'm within a walking distance of Lake Ontario. But there's some that will do better in California or British Columbia. There's some that have a very broad spectrum of zones. Switchgrass being one, it goes from 2 to 7. So there's something you want to look at, because there's going to be less margin of error. So how much risk are you willing to take? How much land are you willing to give up? Or if you have an area, just like planting trees, if you have a 3-acre garden, then you can put half of that in cover crop and use the other half and then rotate every year or two. That's a good thing. If you say, well, I'm just going to put a little strip of this in here because I want to grow all this stuff, I want to grow all these vegetables, then you have to question whether you're actually doing much value. So I think looking at what are the results. Do you feel good? Are the vegetables resilient and vibrant, or whatever it is you're growing? And did it cover the ground the way you wanted it to or needed it to? And if not, revise. Yeah. And don't put something in that's going to freeze if you put it in when you're going to have frost in the spring, or you're going to have an early frost in the fall, because it's not going to do anything. It's not going to grow. So those are some of the cautions, I think.
Someone's asking, they'd like to do a permanent ground cover under an orchard instead of grass. And what would you suggest? Something like a low clover or a vetch, or do you have any other ideas?
Well, yes, if they can grow clovers in that ground, that is something that, and you want a clover that you can walk on, and it's not invasive. It's not going to get into your other plants. I had a whole big garden that was fruit and herbs, and of course the herbs, a lot of them produce flowers. But you know what? The clover said, that's a great spot. The clover moved in on its own. Black-eyed Susans moved in on their own. There were all kinds of things. Said, I like that spot. There's no chemicals in there. There's lots of life in there. I'm going to move in there. So, and I had stinging nettle in many places. And people say, well, why would you allow stinging nettle in your garden? Well, I did use it as a tea herb and other things, but it is a very, very important plant to help create vigor in other plants. So you don't want to put it where you're right beside where you're harvesting the strawberries. You don't want to keep it there, but let it grow where it can grow. Same with comfrey. Let it grow where it can grow. It's a cover. Weeds don't grow up in comfrey.
Nope.
Right? But they've found that it can be carcinogenic. So it's not something that people are necessarily going to feed on the way they did in the past. But it has its value. It enriches compost. And it enriches the soil that's in. Now, I also use things that I add to my soil, in addition to the usual things that Robbie's right. I use a lot of kelp. I use alfalfa. You can grow alfalfa as well as a cover crop, but you can also use pelletized alfalfa as part of your soil mix. So you're putting natural things in a different form. Switchgrass can be pelleted. It can be produced in different ways, and you can use it for different purposes, depending on what you're doing. If you can't grow it, then you want to find a source of organic pellets, unfortunately. So,
can cover cropping be thought of as companion planting with?
Yes, in many cases it is. The ones I mentioned that you grow right in the gardens, the advantage of most of those cover crops, and others may have a different opinion, I have not found the ones I mentioned, whether it's Ficella or the sunflowers, the Germanic sunflowers, the borage. I haven't found anything to be harmed by it, but they are. I mean, borage can get pretty big. I've had gardens, I've gone in the spring, late spring, and I had 60 borage plants growing there. And you know what I did? I transplanted, because I wanted to plant carrots there. I wanted to plant something else. So I took their benefits, but I didn't say, oh, I'm just going to leave them all there and hope for the best when I'm planting carrot seed, because carrot seed doesn't like that competition. But if somebody wants to use something more complex, mustard is amazing. Milk thistle is amazing. But they both are very tough, scratchy plants. Just so you have to have them grow if you're going to let them go. But many of them will come in naturally as you produce the environment. The Dryland Solutions Project they actually worked in projects, I don't know whether anybody's seen them, but they were worked in pure desert. And you know what they did? They made little furrows. They planted seeds. And within a period of time, 10 years or so, it looked like a rainforest. Because things will come to good things. If there's a vacuum, bad things will move in off it. Right? So that's part of the overall lesson here. It may sound mystical or spiritual to people, but the earth is a spiritual entity.
It is.
And if we may not be religious, but if we're not spiritual, we're just functional. And we're not going to feel what we need to feel. It's feeling it. When I go into my soils, I can smell, I can feel it, and I can taste it. And I know it's healthy soil. I don't have to use all that equipment because I've been doing this for 60 years.
Yes, and that was one of my favorite parts of a conversation with Dr. Elaine Ingham, who many people in this room know. She's
Yes.
one of the most world-renowned scientists. I asked her about biodynamics last year in our interview, which is really pushing the boundaries with Dr. Elaine because she is a scientist through and through, and she likes seeing numbers. And she actually acknowledged how some people they know healthy soil when they smell it and when they feel it. And she's like, now that's not me. She's like, I can't do that. I need the microscope and I need to be able to look through to see what I'm seeing. And she's like, and then there's people like you, Bob, who actually can see, taste, and smell and feel.
Well, I
Really
learned from
well.
indigenous people who've been doing it for 20,000 years. They had no equipment.
Yeah.
And my main tool, actually, in my gardens, and you can buy them from a number of places now, is a Korean hoe. It's been used for thousands of years. I don't have a rototiller. I never even owned my own tractor. Everything I did was with hand tools and figuring out what the soil wanted me to do. Because if it wants me to do it, it's going to benefit. If I want it to do it and it doesn't want to do it, I'm wasting my time and energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, are there combinations of cover crops that will negatively impact our neighbors, such as, and this is kind of tied into a companion planting. It's a question that came up. An example would be black walnuts affecting the growth of certain plants.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you can't, if you're going to grow winter rye, you can't, it's allelopathic. It will kill out other things. Definitely. If you grow mustard, it will spread. Certain mustards more than others.
That's only if they go to seed.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If they go to seed, yeah, absolutely. But there's a lot of things that if we don't garden or farm correctly, there's a lot of things that hide. The seeds hide behind things, and so that is definitely an issue with things. It's certainly true with things like alfalfa. Alfalfa is a very tough plant. Make sure you're not going to try to plant strawberries or carrots or in that ground because the alfalfa will win.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to deal with it. You've got to work with it correctly and get the sense of it. And the other thing is, if you don't know something, if you don't know how to find out the information, start real small. Don't do 20 acres with something that you're not sure is going to work. Do a small area and see what that means. And even in terms of spinach, I'm using spinach as I think as a different argument. But if we look at spinach pollen can travel up to 1 kilometer. So it doesn't mean it's just going to be in the area where you plant it. You have to know how it pollinates, because its goal, as I said earlier, is reproduction. It's not feeding us. That's not the goal of plants.
Yeah. How can you tell a cover crop is working or going to work?
Well, I think there's 3 things. If there's no vigor in the plant, it's not going to work in the cover crop. What is your produce like the next year and the years after? When do you notice when do you notice those fruit or vegetables are starting to lose their vinegar? Their vigor? How long do they store? I can store this for up to 2 years if I store it correctly. People tell me, well, my squash only lasted a month after I harvested it. My garlic is gone. Well, it doesn't have vigor. So if you use something and you don't get vigor and production, because many people are doing this to make a living, if you don't get any production, then you got to change the dynamic, change what you're doing, or reassess it based on the changing climate. Our toughest challenge right now is the climate's changing faster than our brains, much faster. Okay, Canada, the increase in temperature, the rate of climate change was greater in Canada than anywhere else in the world, and greater in our Arctic and northern areas than anywhere else. So what are we doing to adapting? What are we doing to to understand the importance of a community of growing things as opposed to one thing. It's the same thing. Oh, well, if I plant trees, I can use the art. Well, I won't get as much production. Yes, you will. Do it right. So that's part of where I'm coming from on this anyway.
Mhm. Can you tell us about perennial cover crops versus annual, and what perennials you'd use and why, and how
Well,
long for?
let me just say that if you look at I'm just looking at here, if you look at the clovers, you'll see everything from an annual clover to a biennial clover. Sweet clover, for example, is biennial, to what can become a permanent clover. So look at the variety and see what zones it works in and try a small area. So that's critical. Switchgrass, which I'm going to talk about more. If you're harvesting switchgrass to use as mulch, you harvest it after 3 years.
Okay, back up the bus.
Yeah.
Tell us what switchgrass is and how to
Okay.
plant it, and then
Okay.
say that again.
Okay, so it's called Ponicum virgatum, plant family Poaceae, close relatives, proso millet, foxtail millet. So it's related to millet. It can be used for industrial, for fiber, biocompost, paper, bioenergy, animal feed, and bedding, and mulch. It's a perennial. It's a native plant. And there are varieties of it depending on what you want to do. You won't always be able to get all those varieties, but I was thinking if somebody wanted to make some money, and I'm going to talk more about the plant, once people know about this, they're going to want it. Who's going to provide it? There's a couple of companies that pelletize it. Matter of fact, I'm just going to go on my phone here for a minute. If you go to REAP Canada, capital REAP Canada, you will get all kinds of information on switchgrass. It doesn't use soil nutrients. It's pretty independent. It likes well-drained soils of finer texture, but are preferable, but they'll too heavy and light soils, but they will grow. Soil pH 6 to 8. So there's different ways of producing it. I'm not a temperature range for germination 24 to 29. That's the ideal. And there are varieties available. What else? Well, if you plant it compared to, or if you use it as a mulch compared to oat straw, and I don't recommend wheat straw, although you can use wheat grass as a cover crop. Why not use wheat straw? Because there's too many seeds. Oats also have seeds. But when you use switchgrass, when you harvest it after 3 years, most of the seeds are lost, so you don't get the self-seeding. It lasts as a mulch. I've had it on the ground for 3 years. And sometimes I add to it. It means you can do permaculture because you don't have to disturb the soil. How did I use it? I didn't buy it in pellets because I was starting before they could get them. We bought large bales from a man who grew it, and they weighed up to 800 pounds, and round bales, and we rolled them out. Square bales, you have to use them piece by piece, but you can roll out a straw bale right through your garden. And nothing I planted didn't go in it. If I needed to, I parted it with a rake, raked off the bed, put in what I needed to put in, and then put it back up close to the plants. Tomato plants, squash plants, productivity. That's what everybody wants. I got 4 to 6 times the productivity from my squash and pumpkins from my tomatoes. People couldn't believe we had thousands of tomatoes on some plants. Like, it wasn't my magic. It was that combination of all the things that we're talking about. And now, as I said, you can get it chopped in bags or pelleted. So you can use it in small gardens. You don't have to use these big rolls. When I started, I didn't have that choice. It's highly effective for weed control. and it can be combined with straw, oat straw. It's good bedding for animals. It's more comfortable for animals like cattle, so they're going to feel better. So it can have a number of purposes. And of course, then you can take the manure from the cattle and the switchgrass and put that into your proper compost mix, right? Because you've got something to add there. It has a large root system like winter rye, and it's very prolific. And I won't get into all the details, but it provides accessible vitamin C and carbon. What are we looking for in our gardening? And this is just the beginning of that. And I can talk about some of the other mulches we need to, but we're just starting to learn about this. But it's a native plant. Why aren't we using what's given to us?
So the switchgrass, you said something about 3 years. So it sounds like a crop that you would, it's like alfalfa or something, that you plant it and then you'd leave it for a number of years and then you'd turn it back into the soil to.
Well, or 3 years, or you'd actually harvest it for using as a mulch, and then it will grow again.
And then you could just keep harvesting it for.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the advantage of it. And it means that when it's 3 years old and it's generally harvested in the spring, it means there's virtually no seeds that come up in your garden bed.
That's interesting. And what's the best cover crop or kind of cover crop for a fallow area before starting vegetable production?
Well, I've always suggested that if people have the time in the area, that using hay mix with alfalfa is probably the best thing and overall for most areas, for most people, because it provides the cover, but it also provides feed. And there's always, you can either be harvested for animals, harvested for mulch, or it can be provided, it's there to feed the life that needs it in the ground. So that's something that's almost every farm, and they have done traditionally, they would grow. And I don't think until fairly recently, maybe the last 30 years, there was a general awareness of how much nutritional value to the soil and to other living things that this had. We thought about, well, we're going to feed the cattle, we're going to feed the horses, but it's a very valuable soil crop. So I would say from that point of view, that's a good place to start, or use the rotation I talked about earlier, but give it a couple of years. Do it for 2 or 3 years, not a month.
Yeah. So if I could just summarize that rotation, because I think that might be new to some people. And so that's basically dividing your farm up. You could say you divide your land up into 3 different sections. You can have a part that's in summer, fall for 3 years, and you're using these other two plots of land where you might be doing a shorter cover crops on those. And the longer cover crop, which you're leaving in there for 3 years or so, which is like the hay and the grasses, then you turn that under, and one of those other of the 3 go into rotation. So I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but somebody asked about thistles, I see here, as well. And so that's one way that people will build their soil if they're up against thistles. Do you have any other cover crop ideas? I have other ideas for that, but
well, one of the things I think related to things like thistles, really unwanted things. And I worked with farmers in Cuba, and I actually have a very close relationship with the man that started organic farming in Cuba. And thistles, if we think they're a problem here, you come to Cuba and other countries like that, where they're everywhere. That tells you that there's something significantly missing in your soil. Usually weeds that are unwanted tell you something about what's lacking in the soil. Healthy soil, and you from your family, from biodynamics and the work you've done, you don't get those things. If you have poor soil, something is going to say, the things that are growing there aren't vigorous, so I can survive there, I can grow there, I can do that. And that's where thistles start to go. When my family place, we bought, I probably won't go through the story, but we bought a farm property, and there was a lot of grazing area. We had horses. They weren't doing crops or anything. But the first year we were there, I noticed thistles everywhere, like 4 to 6 feet high. And of course, once they flower and once they do that. So that was a problem. And there you get burrs and all the rest of it, right? So we had to deal with that. But the gardening area that was down on a flat piece of ground, actually not far from the Credit River, I didn't have any thistles. The fields were full of them. The horses walked around them, but in the gardens there were none. So I'm not trying to make this simplistic, but the reality is we have to test our soil, not just test for the normal 3 things, but test our soil deeply. What is missing? What can we add to that soil before we start to grow things?
It is really powerful to watch land come to life. Like I've been blessed with when my parents first moved to Chilliwack from our farm in Matsqui. Matsqui was this beautiful microbial rich soil where we pick up handfuls of soil, and there would be like teeming with like life, just earthworms and all the things. And then we came out to Chilliwack and you pick up these handfuls of dust. And I was like, what is this? I hope my dad knows what he's doing. And then to see that soil come back to life was absolutely extraordinary. And it happened in a very, very short and very, very fast like period of time. And then when I moved out a few years ago, I was out in Saskatchewan and on a farm that had been like hadn't been used, chemicals hadn't been used on it for a very, very long time. But the soil was it was kind of meh. It just been hay, and I think they had been taking, and then I put in a big vegetable and blueberry or strawberries and had a wall of thistles in my strawberry field, and I just was like, oh my gosh, like it was a wall of thistles, like what you're talking about, like 3-4 feet high.
And you can't leave hay forever. It has
That's
to be
right.
replenished.
Yeah, but you know what? They were gone. Every single one of them practically gone
Exactly.
in less than 3 years. Like, and theoretically, it's impossible because the farmer who farms next to me, who's also an organic farmer, whose dad had been farming it, and he had just gotten lazy on his son will even say he got lazy on his practices. He stopped doing the crop rotations and he just started to plant and take. And then he had a massive thistle problem. So when the thistles went to seed in this field that's right next to mine, it would look like it snowed. Like, I'm not kidding you. I'd had inches of thistle seed on my garden. And you know what? Not one thistle. Okay, I'm exaggerating. And about 1.5 acres, there's like, maybe 20 thistles that I had to pull out. That's it.
Yep. Absolutely. Do you want me to run through some of the organic mulches that can be used because they're related? I could just do that quickly.
Organic cover crops, you mean?
Well, these are things that are fit with them. Remember, they're all working together.
Yep.
So, and this is, I'm really crediting here. It's called Fine Gardening, finegardening.com. They've done an article, so people can go to that. The first is compost, and you do a lot of things on compost. That is related to cover crops and to mulches, right? It's the most important thing in many ways to add. Dry leaves, newspaper, and cardboard. So these are things that you don't grow as cover crops, but they help your soil. Straw and seedless hay, we've talked about that. Those things are really important. And so I don't want to not mention those things because they have a huge impact on all the other things. You don't want to plant a cover crop in a field that's full of weeds or full of problems. Hard rock soil, no penetration. In other words, yes, they will help, but the more you help them, the more they'll help you. So there's a relationship always back and forth between the key elements of good farming and good gardening and what you use to take it another step further. Whether it's
and what would you suggest for like any particular cover crops for soil remediation, say land that's been sprayed a lot with glyphosate or Roundup or plant steroids, that type of thing?
That's a tough one. I mean, definitely we know that if you can plant in combination with herbs are soil cleaning by and large. So, and of course we have different names. We have vegetables and we have fruit and we have herbs. We all know that these are false categories, right? They all work. So if you want to recover the soil, then you want to grow the things that I mentioned earlier and always observe and see what the difference is over time, and then look at what has happened. Your pH in your soil is going to change. Other things are going to change in that soil. So what, and are you using rock phosphate if you need it? Are you, because let's face it, our soil comes from rocks and from trees and greens. So what do we need to do to balance there? There's no easy fix when things have gone downhill. But let me tell you, the farm I had here in Northumberland that I'm referring to was not classified as farmland. It was not class 1, 2, 3 farmland. It had actually never been farmed. It had been pastured to some degree. But we got phenomenal production by living with the natural practices that were there and then amplifying them through through all the things we added to it, which include cover crop and mulches. So we went from that land could have been turned, except for the conservation area with the water below it. And that's another factor. We were part of an old riverbed, and the far end of it would flood, so you couldn't plant early. So I was always a month or more later in planting, but we got better results. So it's a matter of compensating for things. And obviously in that worst corner, I could not have grown certain things. So I grew later crops when the soil was drier. The beans loved it there, for example, because they were a warm weather crop. The other thing people can use, which is useful, are our beans, fava beans, chickpea, garbanzo beans. Those things are fabulous in terms of cover crop as well, soil conditioner. Yes, you can harvest them because you can take them off, just as I used to take the field peas off that were in with the mix, right? So yes, you could. And yes, you could take some of the buckwheat seed, not all of it probably, but some of it, take it by hand and use it, of course. So it's the combination of that life cycle and the complexity of life that rejuvenates the soil. But if we don't cover it, we can add all the fertilizer in the world. The corn production is going to go down if we don't rotate and we don't cover every year.
Bob, is a cover crop with higher bricks better for later veg or a fruit crop, or doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters, except what you wanted. The difference between, say, tree fruits and things is you want fungal growth as opposed to bacterial growth. So you have to know what you're going to do there. So putting things in that will promote bacterial growth won't produce better fruit trees. So what I did is I took branches. I had apple and crab apple particularly, which were used for cider. I took branches off other small under trees, and that's what I put underneath the trees. Cut branches, because they need, and that encourages fungal growth as opposed to bacterial growth. And that's a huge factor in terms of whether you're growing fruit on a tree or whether you're growing root vegetables. There's a big difference in terms of what you want to promote there. I'm not suggesting there aren't common factors. There are, obviously. But it's looking at if we want to specialize, because nature doesn't plant in huge sections and rows. I live in apple country through Northumberland, through there. Thousands and thousands of monocropped apple trees. Not one orchard is organic. Amount of spray that's going on there. Think about it. Apples. When people ask me about apples, don't grow apples. Grow pears or plums or something else, because there's so much insect pressure from all this other. You're not going to be able to grow organic apples very, very easily. without using chemicals. So there's no point promoting the apple tree if in fact it's got to deal with that whole environment that is not conducive to it, even though environmental temperature wise, it's perfect, right? So that's a huge choice for people. But I've seen apple orchards go from low density and maybe several hundred trees to the same area, thousands of trees, small trees, no leaves, close density, and the apples are coming off the first year, right? That's not natural in the broadest terms of that. So if we want to do things that are sustainable, which is the most important thing we can do in that situation, make it better, make it sustainable, then we have to look at what we want to grow, where we want to grow it, and what will support and enhance that.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to go back to the vegetable cropping, the person who had the questions about the vegetable crops. Our family does a lot of cover cropping, and they use fall rye, and then they also do intermixed species. And Bob, you talked a lot about intermixed species, and so you can actually find those through seed companies.
Oh yeah.
And and if there's a combination that you feel would be the right connection for your soil and work well for you, then you can buy various seeds and make your own interspecies cover crop. And then the other thing I wanted to say for that was you can also, if you are like a bigger green farmer, or you have bigger areas of land to cover, then you can also, there's big seed companies who will make custom orders for you, and they will, if being a certified organic is important, there are bigger seed companies that do certified organic mixed cover crops as well.
Yeah, and actually I mentioned William Dam. They have 4, and one is a spring mix, so that's oats and balansa clover and field peas and lentils. And they go to summer with Sudan grass, sun hemp, cowpeas, Pedrovic sunflowers. Fall is oats, crimson clover, tillage radish, and lentils. So that's a mix that you can put in. And they also have the bee mix, which I mentioned, borage and phacelia. You can get all those things from other places, but they prep it for you, right? You can, instead of buying each one separately, and they tell you the advantage of the good seed catalogs is they tell you how much you need, what the sowing rate is. And it tells you, for example, whether you're planting it by hand, like broadcasting, or whether you're drilling it. That'll tell you how much you need. So it's a pretty good guide.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's people here that know many other sources. Obviously I'm aware of them, but I can't list them all.
Yeah, so true. And Tina's just asking she says to clarify, she's adding a stone walkway to her garden, which I love, Tina, nice work. And she'd like to fill in the area around the stone with clover. Which type of clover would be best?
That's a good question. Does she want it to be permanent?
Permanent? Like come back every
like white clover is a standard one that's fairly available. And I think would be I don't know whether people are familiar with balansa clover, but it's an annual. Crimson clover is an annual. Sweet clover is a biennial. But if you go to white clover, it's gonna work more as a perennial. So
and it grows shorter.
And the other thing she can grow in there is there's varieties of oregano and thyme and things like that you can use, and you can step on them.
That's what I was thinking too.
And you can harvest them, and they're good for pollinators.
Yeah.
So I would suggest experimenting with those things and see which. And there's other people putting things into the creeping time. Other people will have other experiences of what's worked for them.
Oh, and someone says they like bird's foot trefoil. Trefoil.
Where are they located?
That's a good question.
And what's the zone?
Where are you located, and what's the zone? What has been the most challenging project that you've worked on, Bob, where you use cover crops, and what was like, what was the transformation that you witnessed?
The challenge, well, one of the big challenges, and I've referred to it indirectly, is if you're going to put in winter rye or fall rye, if you're harvesting crops, you generally don't have a lot of those things off till sometime in October, late October. That's too late to plant fall rye. So yes, you can plant it, but you won't get much. It won't get the root mass. So what I've learned, of course, is if I want to get a good fall rye crop, I can't plant it after I harvest the squash and the pumpkins and everything else. I've got to plant it somewhere where it can go in. So maybe early green crops, early peas and beans, things that are going to be harvested. And you can start then planting the winter rye at the beginning of September as opposed to the end of October. It makes a huge difference. So that is a real challenge. And I've gone into a number of places where things, as you mentioned earlier, have been let go. They were in bad shape, right?
Right.
Figuring out how much I want to do and how long I want to take to do it, to get it right, takes time. When I first moved out to that farm, the local farmers came, they thought it was trying to joke. They talked to each other. This guy's coming. He's going to grow organic biodynamic vegetables. Ha, ha, ha. Can't do that. They'd say he can't do that there. The land was wet. It's only good for corn if you do it right, all that kind of stuff. Same as Prince Edward County. And within 2 years, they were bringing tours. Oh, you should see what he's doing. Oh, can we get some?
That's really cool.
So showing people is more important than telling people.
Yes, get your hands in the soil. That's right. Practice it. The best way to learn how to make compost is making compost.
Yeah, exactly.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah, and
learn
you
it.
and Elaine and others can talk about compost. I could talk about it forever.
Yeah, but the same thing with cover crops, right? The best way to learn what cover crops are going to work for you is to practice using different cover crops and noticing noticing how long they take to go to flower and making sure you're knocking them down and crimping them or putting them back into the soil before they go to seed, because ideally we're wanting to turn those cover crops back into the soil to get that nutrition.
And have flowers and food for the pollinators from spring till as late in fall as you can. So one thing is not going to accomplish everything. It's the whole that matters. And if you do that, you bring in more life, which then helps that cover crop that you were trying to grow that you have to plant at a certain time of year, because everything has helped it up to then instead of held it up. And that's an overstatement, a simplistic statement, but that's generally true. Everything can help everything else if it's done the way it needs to be done.
Yeah, I just want to address someone messaged privately on chat. They said that you're talking about buying and using switchgrass and growing it for a crop rather than like a cover crop idea. So
it's actually both.
Yeah, can you clarify that? Just tell them how that works.
Well, most people are not going to likely grow their own switchgrass because it takes big equipment. Imagine preparing an 800-pound bale, right? Think about it. So they're likely going to get it from someone who grows it, and that's how I got it. Or now, as I said, you can buy it chopped or in various forms by the bag. So there are companies that are selling that, and actually the Reap site that I mentioned earlier has a lot of. They'll tell you that. So it's a matter of finding out from your local supplier, and it's important. Even though the switchgrass in its raw form may be great, if you're going to order it, 50% or more of your cost is the shipping.
I guess more what I meant, Bob, is like, why do you I thought the idea is a cover crop is giving back to the earth, and when you're harvesting switchgrass, we're taking away, and so this is new to some people of why. For example, that's right. So I'll just give an example. Like when farming in the prairies, we would always have one of our fields, or a certain amount of our fields, we would be seeding down to hay, what we call hay. So it would be a multi-species cover crop. And for the first year or two, nothing would be harvested. But on the third year, we'd harvest it. And for the first 2 years, they're feeding the soil. And when we're harvested the third year, I mean, you're taking from the soil, but it's already put in so much that you can get a really, really good crop.
Same as the switchgrass.
Exactly. And so then you turn it into it sounds like with switchgrass, would you turn it in after that third year?
That's what most of the farmers do who grow it, and they may grow something else in that area. They may use that for a hay field or wheat field, and they'll put the switchgrass somewhere else. It's the rotation, the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that because that's
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And this is a good question too. Tips for sowing cover crop seeds into hard clay soil in a small area without a tractor. Any ideas?
Well, if I had a really hard compacted soil, I would work it just enough to plant radish, daikon radish, and start with that. You will then see probably and if you've planted fairly thick, you will see a difference, I think, within a year. And you will see that you will have soil that's aerated down. As I said, I had them over 3 feet in soil that had not, and I'm talking about including in soil that had not been treated well. Okay, so that's where I would start. Also, alfalfa and also switchgrass, because if you can get them into the soil, they will deepen your soil at much less expense than what you would have to do with equipment. And that doesn't help the composition of the soil. Those things do. So living things is the answer here, right? And if you need to provide, like was talked about before, you need to provide shrubs and trees that partially shade an area. That's good too, because some things don't like to be baked 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And as Ben said, most things don't need 100% sun, right? So those are things I would combine. Look at what can go, and then if you're going to plant things in that area, plant things that are light feeders and very short rooted. And I'll give you an example of something I do that's companion and essentially a cover crop. After I plant my potatoes, and I used to plant a lot of different kinds of organic potatoes, when they were hilled the first time, I planted, I didn't even dig in. I threw radish seeds on all the hills, and I got hundreds of pounds of radishes. Didn't have to have a dedicated area, but they covered the soil, prevented weed growth, and had the benefit of being a harvestable crop, because they'll grow once, you'll start to harvest in a month. So think about it. You can even do more than one round of that. They're not real heavy feeders. And think about how you can utilize that soil and prevent it from being bare. Mulch is one way, crops are another way.
Right. And just off the top, I have a list here that I can help with too, Bob, but just off the top, do you can you give us an idea of what different families of cover crops do? So for example, which ones are nitrogen fixers, which ones are just an overall health benefit, and which ones are good at breaking up soil compaction?
Well, we talked about the compaction a little bit, and obviously the ones that have the most root mass and the most deepest roots are going to work there. I like switchgrass because it doesn't need a lot of mineral, and it will actually do what you're talking about. It'll make nitrogen, carbon available. Those are things that are really important. Obviously, a crop that produces a big root mass, whether it's alfalfa or winter rye, is going to help fix nitrogen. And that's going to be significant in terms of the long-term planting. Oat can as well. It's a green manure. These plants are green manures, so they're producing compostable material, but they're also producing the environment which compost will maximize its benefit, which again fixes nitrogen. So and somebody's soil in some part of the country may be very different from somewhere else, what they need and when they need it. I think, and certainly, like if we look at nettle, we look at comfrey, things like that, they do that as well because they energize. We're looking at energizing plants. That's the purpose that they have. Lentils, peas, that family can do that because it's the same when you grow beans. They are fixing nitrogen, right? So, I guess we could do a whole workshop.
I know. I know that's a whole different conversation, right?
Yeah, and sun hemp is a soil builder. It's not used very often, or not as much as some other things. But yeah, as a matter of fact, if someone has a space, buy 5 or 6 of these things and put them in at the right time near each other and see what they do to essentially what is the same soil in your property, right?
Awesome. And one more question here. What are your thoughts on moringa, sun hemp, and flacia?
I think they're important because they combine function. They provide nutrients. They also provide food for pollinators. And I think that every garden should have a variety of things, from those things that are there for the whole season to their things that are there for part of the season. And don't be afraid to put it in with the crops you're harvesting for marketing. Some of my best garden areas had different kinds of poppies. I grow the other thing I haven't mentioned much, but I grow Mexican sunflowers. Are people familiar with those? Do you know what Mexican sunflowers do? They're not sunflowers, by the way, but they call them that. What do you think the monarchs eat when they're in Mexico? So in the fall, I have thousands of monarchs gather on my Mexican sunflowers. They are part of a very important chain of life. We can't even measure it all. By bringing in those things, we are invigorating the soil. If we have a pond and we've got frogs in that pond, they don't just live and reproduce. They are part of the life force. And if you take them out, everything else suffers. So I think we have to be flexible. We have to add things that we can and be prepared. There's going to be times they don't work. There's something else happen. It's 45. I worked in my fields. I'm in a microclimate zone where my garden was, the farm was. And I had temperatures as high as 47 in the field when I was working, because I kept track. And if you get a drought and many, many days over 35 or 40, there's going to be plants that suffer. What I learned from that is don't leave them to suffer. Do something that gives them a better opportunity, a better chance of life. And when you start to do that, you see that they are going to survive at a much higher rate than if we just say, oh, it's too hot and dry, there's nothing we can do about this. So that's why the things are so important in themselves, but they're important teaching us what it's like to get back to nature.
Oh man, such a good place to wrap, Bob. Thank you so much for your insights around really connecting us with sitting in our fields and in our gardens and feeling what we feel and noticing what we notice about what it's asking us to do next.
Well, when we think about religion, it talks about praying and getting on your knees.
Yeah.
If we want to connect to the life force, we better be down there on our knees.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bringing all of your life experience to this conversation and sharing your time with us and your wisdom and your insights. People are hopping off. We have a couple of prizes to give away. If you're an All Access Pass holder, we have a couple of gifts to give away. Do you have those already drawn for, Leslie? While you're gathering that, I'll just give you a quick. I just want to give you a hug through the screen. Bob, thank you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I appreciate you. And thank you for all your ongoing support with Heart and Soil. I think you're one of the first people to jump in and just say, this is awesome. Thanks for sharing this with us. And anything I can do to support you, let me know. And so it's nice to finally have you in the room with us sharing your just a small little piece of your life experience with us. So deep gratitude.
Thank you very much, Donna.
Yeah, and our next session is with Brooke Hayes, and I'm really excited because we're talking about how, she's in the room. Yes, I did see your name, and now you're on the screen. Yay, Brooke, woo! We are going to wrap this up, and then we're going to come back in to join you for your session. And she's going to be doing a short little presentation about the decomposition of organic matter and what that means about how healthy your soil is or how healthy it's not. So it's going to help give you insight into feeling into your soil even more in a different way. And like Bob says, it's not just one thing like cover crops that is part of the journey. It's all connected, and that's why we have so many diverse topics in the Soil Summit. So that starts at the top of the hour at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it too is 90 minutes. And bring your questions about, she's a researcher too. And she works with people in the field. So she's a really cool, insightful human who is studying soil health on lots of different levels, and also how it's connected to human health and community health. So we're going to be just looking at those links and how powerful and impactful they are. And we have a couple giveaways, and the free watch page is in the links. Bob is basically kind of retired. And so they're really, if you want to find him, you got to find him working for an NGO or visit him at his home and in his garden. He doesn't have a website or any socials. If you search his name, you can see all the different articles that he's written and places that he's working and with and donating his time. And do you do any paid consulting anymore as well, privately?
But people can email me.
Okay, so people can email you. So if you'd like his email, then please reach out to us and we will share that with you. Okay. And what else? Leslie.
Oh, another fabulous session together. I did put Bob's email in the chat. I've been putting things in the chat all along here. So because our topic was cover crops, Natalie, I decided to do 2 of the cover crop seeds during this session. So Russell and I are already communicating. He is one of the winners.
And that's from High Mowing Seeds,
right? Cover crop seeds are sponsored by High Mowing Organic Seeds. So they are really focused on quality of their seeds and
all their seeds are organic. Sorry for cutting off.
And they too have they have really good resources too for your growing. So when you're asking about the different types of cover crops, you'll be able to find all that directly through their website as well. So we love to amplify fabulous human beings and their businesses. So Bob, thank you. We appreciate you. Look forward to being in the room with you again. Brooke, so excited for our conversation. So that's next. So I do invite everybody to step away from the computer, stretch your legs, get your drink of water, but come back. Be back in 20 minutes. Come back in 20 minutes.
Yeah, and I see some love in the chat for you too, Bob. Some are being sent privately and some are. Oh, did he go? Did he leave?
Oops, he might have. That's okay.
Yeah, anyways, that's okay. We'll send him a thank you.
We will. And if you're still in the room and you would like to share appreciation with Bob in the chat, we'll make sure he gets the messages.
Yeah, and I'd also love to know what your biggest takeaway was from this session. Like what's something that you learned or something that you're going to try? Like what was your biggest takeaway? What was
Well, I personally have a lot I'm thinking about. I have a small area of land and I think I'm gonna try several different things in my small area of land. That's okay. Yay me.
Yeah, you.
Okay.
Please
Oh,
have
thank
thanks
you.
to
Thank
yourselves
you,
and Bob.
Mark.
Thanks, Mark. It's nice to see you in the room. It's so awesome to see so many people. I'm not seeing all the faces, but I'm seeing your beautiful names and feeling your beautiful energy. So thanks for joining us. Big love, and we'll see you in 30. Well, 20
Yes.
minutes, actually sooner.
Yes.
We'll open
And,
the room up probably about 5 minutes beforehand.
yeah, and congratulations on giving yourself this time, right? To really nourish yourself and get new ideas and be in the room.